Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 2 Kings chapter 17, and this is a sad chapter. There's going to be others, and the reason why it is sad is because God is going to give a very detailed list of why Israel fell. And you wring your head. That's my thumbnail, right? Wring your head. You go, why? The saddest thing here. Think about this, and I realize this is an unbalanced comparison. But think about if you had fake, okay? So let's say if this was a lotto ticket. You can't see it, but let's say if it's a lotto ticket. And in that lotto ticket, it's $1 billion. And I think they give you a year to claim it, so whatever time. And then you come to the end of that year. And the day after that year, you discover you got a lotto ticket worth $1 billion, but you lose out. That would sting. That would sting to know that you had that. Now again, uncompared comparison. What I'm saying is that Israel had the living true God. No other nation on the earth in any time in history has had the living God that raised them up, supernaturally manifested his presence to them, protected them, guided them, right? The laws was given to no other nation. And even though, as I often say, that there's some things about the Old Testament law that makes us go scratches our head. Slavery, for example. But in and of itself, that just simply means we don't understand God's reasoning for that. That's okay. But if Israel obeyed God's commands, life would have been great. They would have been protected. Because just think about this. If Ukraine was Israel, that God had raised up, and then you had Russia that came, God would have protected. Again, unfair comparison, I realize. So when we go through this list right here, God, it is a scathing indictment of Israel's sin. Now remember, as I said when we started our journey through the Bible, he said the one thread that you will see threaded throughout the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and there are several, but in context to this, is man's sinful nature. That man's sinful nature is unbelievable, and Israel's unbelief is unbelievable. And that Israel, who like anyone else who had God on their side, his presence, still sinned, still turned to the pagans, whom was God they conquered. And it's just unbelievable. So let's get into it. Last time we got into Israel's fall, and remember, Israel's fall was about 130 years before Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon's invasion. And And so that meant by the time he gets here, Israel would have been laying bare, as it were. Now, there's going to be some other things happen we get into here. But he would have been, it would have been laying bare for this amount of time, just barren. And have you ever seen cities or the my parents' hometown is a good example of this, where the county of St. Louis took over. The city is called Kinloch. They took it over in the 80s. And so when I think about my grandparents' home, I used to go over my grandparents, my grandmother. Now, all of that, right now to that day, that it's a warehouse. But for decades, that it just sat vacant. If you drove through there, you would see just vacant land, empty land, where it took it over. And we can multiply this over and over and over and over again. That's the sadness of what is going on here. Hoshea, I think it's named Hoshea. I said Hosea last time. Hoshea is the last king of Israel. Now keep this in mind when we say Israel. Israel is the northern tribes. And then Judah is the southern tribes. And they fall. And so this is why. So verse 7, he says, this disaster happened. Let me go back to chapter 6. It says, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He deported the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Halah and by the harbor, Goshen, the Goshen River, and in the cities of the Medes. And we said that this term Medes here is the Persian and Medes. So later on, they will become one of the world dominating kingdoms. Okay. Verse 7, this disaster happened because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and because they have worshipped other gods. Now, this is always the reason God judges. And the reason why I say that is because when you see critics who attempt to say, and you see this today, why is God allowing all of this suffering? Okay, so just whatever you want to plug that into, why is God allowing all the subject? Right here is the reason. If God is not judging, now that sometimes people who say God is judging when God is not. But if you say, okay, that the pandemic is because of God's judgment, okay, then you're misrepresenting God. But he says here, the reason why is because they sinned and worshiped other gods. Verse 8, they had lived according to the customs of the nations that God had disposition before the Israelites. And the customs the kings of Israel had introduced. I don't know why I cannot pronounce this here.
Dispossessed.
Oh, dispossessed. Okay. All right. I'm finding out a lot of these little toys. So dispossessed. Okay. Before the Israelites. All right. Verse 9. The Israelites secretly did what was not right against the Lord their God. They built high places in all of their towns, from watchtowers to fortified cities. Now remember, we said that one of the continual plagues was, even though it could have been a good king, the good king would leave the high places, and these high places were high elevated plots of land or ground. So that the thought from paganism is the higher up you get, the closer to the deities you would get. Israel, of course, had Jerusalem. They had places of worship, and they had the true God. Verse 10, they set up for themselves sacred pillars, Asherah's pole on every high hill and under every green tree. They burned incense on all the high places, just like those nations that the Lord had driven out before them. They did evil things, provoking the Lord. And again, this is the tragedy of Israel, that they could have been, as God will say, a unique possession of the Lord. Instead, they wanted to be like the other pagans. And by the way, again, the other pagans were just evil. We saw last time offering their children to Moloch. They burned incense, not incense, but they would burn them in the fire, or as sometimes in some of the translations, they passed through the fire. It was a brutal, evil thing to do to a child. Because they would, by the way, when they would do that, I told you that the Moloch god that was built like this had his arms extended like this, and then they would lay the infants and toddlers on there, and they would burn to death, die from excruciating heat pain. This is what their worship was. This is what their worship was. This is who Israel wanted to be like. Verse 12. They served idols, although the Lord had told them, you must not do this. Still the Lord warned Israel and Judah through every prophet and every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commands and statutes according to all the law. And I commanded your ancestors and sent to you through my servant, the prophets. Right? So why did they fall? Because they did not listen to God's established prophets. And by the way, let me just say something. All these little fake prophets you see today, notice here true prophets warn the people to turn from their evil way. Not just gimmicks to get crowds. Live your best life. Okay, I digress. Verse 14, but they would not listen. This is the key of judgment. But they would not listen. Instead, they became obstinate like their ancestors who did not believe the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenant he had made with their ancestors and the decrees he had given them. They pursued worthless idols and became worthless themselves, following the surrounding nations the Lord had commanded them not to imitate. Sad. This is right. Verse 16. They abandoned all of the commands of the Lord their God, and they made cast images for themselves, 2 calves. This was the sin of Jeroboam. They made cast images for themselves, 2 calves, and an Asherah's pole. They worshipped the whole heavenly host and served Baal. Remember this during the time of Ahab, right? 400 prophets of Baal. They made their sons and daughters pass through the fires. Now that was that, again, torturous thing, barbaric. They made the sons pass through the fire. They practiced divination and interpreted omens. They devoted themselves to do what was evil in the Lord's sight and provoked him. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained, and they're going to go too. Even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord God, but lived according to the customs Israel had introduced. For the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel, afflicted them, and handed them over to plunderers until he banished them from his presence. When the Lord tore Israel from the house of David, Israel made Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Then Jeroboam led Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit great sin. Again, very sad, right? Jeroboam was the king that made the 2 calves. Rehoboam was Solomon's son. Verse 22. The Israelites persisted in all the sins that Jeroboam had committed and did not turn away from them. Finally, the Lord removed Israel from his presence, just as he had declared through all his servants, the prophets. So Israel has been in exile to Assyria from their homeland until this day. Now, it tells you that this was written then afterwards. Whoever written it. Some people believe, again, that Ezra wrote this, but we don't know who wrote this book. Verse 24, then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kotha, Ava, Hamath, Saphraim, and settled them in place of Israel in the cities of Samaria. The settlers took possession of Samaria and lived in these cities. And when they first lived there, now let me stop. Now let me right here we see the beginnings of the what would become the Sumerians. So that's the term Sumerians here. So the Sumerians, the Samaritans, I should say, were mixed. So I'm pointing this out here because the mixture, right, came. The mingling came because Israel was put out, okay, of Israel because of judgment. So the Assyrians, right, started populating the land of Israel. Okay. Now, after the Babylonian Empire invasion, which it's a 70 years. So from this point is almost 200 years. So during the time of Nehemiah, Ezra, when they started coming back, then they started living in the lands, but the people still live here. And then when they came back, they started mixing. So some of those people that mixed with in the Samaritan region, Israel, and then some of these Assyrians, and the people that are Assyrians, and then later people that would come and live in. This is where you get the Samaritans from. So then when we come to the John chapter 4, when we come to John chapter 4, and Jesus has to go through Samaria. The Jews at the time hated the Samaritans. And the reason why is because they tried to disown them. Now, during the, not so long ago in our time, the term bastard children would come up. And bastard children have always been a plague. And this is what a bastard child is. So if you start off with a married person, so two married people, legitimately married. So the husband, it could be the wife, but most cases it probably was the husband, go out and he cheats, have an affair, and then he had a child. So the child is legitimately his. But because his mother wasn't married to the wife, that's why the term bastard child came across. And oftentimes they were mistreated, they were disowned, not acknowledged. And so the Samaritans, in a sense, were the same way. They were mixed. So then, like the Pharisees came along, like they were full-blooded Jews, Hebrews of Hebrews. We could trace our ancestries, right? Ancestry back. And in fact, the Samaritan became a derogatory term, like the N-word. They called Jesus a Samaritan. Okay. And so that's why you have that when you read through the Gospels. Okay. Now I'm going to stop here and I'll pick this up in the next study because it goes more into why some of them, what happened there too. It's kind of interesting story. Alright guys, don't forget to like and share this video. And hit that subscribe button that you see right there. Subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And remember, all comments are welcome. I will see you in the next study. Okay.